Okay, so in a franchise community, so to speak, the big question comes to when the foreigners are looking to obtain their legal status in the United States. What are some of the things that they should think about or they should be informed about in regards to purchasing franchises, whether as passive investors or the investors and operators?
All righty. Well, so Milos, really, when they're looking at this, um, and they actually want to come to the United States, whether that be part time or whether that be full time, they should really be looking at two different categories of investment visas. There are visas for people that want to come and maybe that don't necessarily want to be here permanently, and those that want to be here permanently. When you're talking about someone that's not thinking permanence, that is more along the lines of an E2 visa. An E2 visa is a visa where a person invests in the United States, creates an active business that benefits the United States economy, that creates jobs, and that leads to economic activity for the United States. And so when a consular officer or a USCIS officer, immigration officers, right, when they see this, they're looking to see, oh, wow, this is a substantial investment. This is benefiting the United States. Let me give this person a visa because they're helping my economy of my country, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to how long do they have to be in the United States, some people, for tax purposes, may decide that they want to not be in the United States more than 6 months. The threshold where people start to actually have to maybe be considered U.S. tax residents is 6 months. So there may be people that decide that they want to avoid that and be in the United States 5 months a year, but they want 5 years, 5 months of peace and quiet, right? That when they
Mm-hmm.
come to the United States, they're not going to be overly questioned about what they're coming here for. That when they come to the United States, they're coming here and they can manage their business. They can be here several months and not have any trouble when they come into the United States. The E2 visa, depending on the country where they're from, is normally granted in 5 year increments, but some countries it may be less. Some countries it's 2 years, some countries it could be 18 months, some countries it's 1 year, but it really depends on which country you're talking about.
Yeah. When I think one key point that I picked up on is the fact of the economic boost to the U.S. Right, where what I've seen in the past, what I've heard of in the past, and had clients in the past do is they've contributed their investment in the real estate business, for which sake real estate did not really generate any economic boost, so to speak, to the U.S. in terms of hiring the labor or consuming the produce or the equipment that needs to operate a business. So, how do you see investment in franchises that are actual operational businesses with staff, produce, and equipment in place? Do you see them far more valuable than real estate investments in terms of immigration approval?
Absolutely, absolutely. When you purchase one unit, it could be an expensive unit, it could be $1 million unit, it could be $2 million unit, especially the way the prices for real estate have gone up. We're talking about large amounts. Even when you're talking about a large unit like that, yes, there's an economic impact, and yes, there's indirect jobs created. But what the Department of State looking for in these cases is more of an active business. So because they're looking for more of an active business, purchasing 1 or 2 units really is not going to be what gets you that visa. What'll get you that visa a lot easier is a franchise. It might, if these are franchises that don't have a high price point, let's say they're franchises that are worth 50,000 or 75,000, then maybe we're looking at a purchase of two units of franchises, maybe three, in large metropolitan areas such as Miami, Atlanta, New York, Chicago. You're really looking at opportunities where you could have two or three franchises, and it might not be that difficult to handle because you're talking about a large city that can support that number of franchises. So yes, in answering your question more directly, yes, a franchise is a very good way of getting an E2 visa. Explaining the E2 visa a little better, you're looking at a visa that allows you to come to the United States and live here if you wish. I know that we had talked about maybe avoiding tax issues, but let's say that you've decided that you want to come to the United States and you want to make that dream come true, of living in the States and bringing up your kids. We see this a lot with families that want their kids to have a U.S. education and want them to be able to go to college later and want them to become residents. The best first step is this type of visa through a franchise, where you are basically allowed to come to the United States with your spouse and your children under 21. The spouse is granted an automatic work permit to work in anything that spouse may wish to work. So there are advantages of structuring these investments sometimes to decide and say, well, which of the two, husband or wife or what have you, which of the two wants to have the open work permit to be able to work in whatever they want? And when we talk about work, we're not only talking about being able to work, but that spouse could also open a business or open several businesses if they wish, because they're going to have an open work permit that allows them to either work for an employer, work for themselves, open businesses, or maybe even just not work at all. But that option is there.
Sure. In a most recent past, what are some of the thresholds, I guess, financially that you have seen immigration offices consider a valuable and valid investment? What are some of the benchmarks, just so that people would better understand what kind of investment they need to contribute towards a business in order for them to have any shot at their change of status?
Okay. In the past, before the pandemic, we would see investments that sometimes were on the lower threshold of what the government might consider is substantial. What the government is looking for is a substantial investment, and that word "substantial" is very subjective. Substantial was never defined in the regulations, and the reason that they didn't define it is because they want these regulations to be regulations that they don't have to change every 6 months. So these are regulations that have been in place for a long time. So what was substantial in 1980 because of inflation in 2023 is different. So we found that before the pandemic, maybe we could be talking about $100,000 in terms of an investment, maybe even on the lower end, $75,000. I have seen those granted. I don't know that those would be approved now. I think that because of inflation, global inflation, because when we're talking about inflation, I think in the United States, we're a little spoiled. We think that inflation is 5%. We don't know that in other countries, I believe the UK was 10% and still 10%, and now we're at 3%. So we're very spoiled here. We think that we have high inflation. We really don't when you compare it to other countries. So I would say that to answer your question more directly, I think that we should be looking at investments above 125, maybe 150, 150K. If we're talking about those numbers, when I speak to my clients and they ask me this directly, I always tell them, if you have more to invest, you are better off investing more. The more you invest, the more of an incentive you're giving to that officer to approve your case, and less discretion you're giving them in terms of finding issues with your case.
In terms of business size and its operating capacity, how much of a variable does it play the size of the company in terms of its employees? So if they were to purchase a franchise or open up a business, does it matter whether they have, they make the substantial investment of $125,000, $150,000 or more? Does it matter if they have 3 to 5 employees, or would they have to have 10, 15? What is the benchmark?
Okay. There really isn't a benchmark when it comes to E2s. However, I will say that I would prefer, if I had to choose between 2 clients coming to me with 2 different proposals, I would always prefer the client that has more employees than less. If we're talking about a situation with 5 employees, that should be good. But the more employees you have, the more easy it makes us to establish the issue of marginality. And that issue is that this is a business that can provide more than that will provide an excess of what you and your family need to live. So when you're talking about the marginality issue, more employees is better, because obviously if there's 4 or 5 employees, those 4 or 5 employees, you are contributing through that business, and the employment by the business of these employees, you're contributing to those families being able to make it, to actually make a living and to have what they need to live. So that is a positive factor. Now, the visa itself in the regulations does not require employees. However, if there's a business plan that shows that they're going to be hired, that is helpful. I think that it's good also to show that the employees that you've already, if let's say that the calculation was you were going to have 5 employees within 6 months, and you've already hired 1, and you have another 2 that are being onboarded, I think that that is very favorable when you go to the immigration interview, especially if this visa is being requested soon after you actually started the business and the investments have been made, and you want to get your visa quick. Those are positive factors that can help you to get that visa.
Got it. In terms of, you mentioned the different consulates and the countries. In terms of the E2 visas, has it been more or less difficult with some consulates in terms of negotiating your client's approval, and how does that vary? How would even foreign applicants know if their country is more or less qualified to have an easier or harder process of approval?
Okay, so when it comes to the countries, the first thing we have to look at is the country part of a treaty with the United States? So that is very important. So the first thing that I look at when a client asks me, can I do an investor visa, I have to ask, well, what nationality do you have, or what nationalities do you have? I have a lot of clients that are dual nationals. So those are people that, and we get this a lot with South America. Let's say you're from Brazil, but you also have a passport through your ancestry from Portugal, and maybe you also have a passport from Italy. Well, Italy does have a treaty with the United States, so we could do it through your Italian nationality instead of using Brazil or Portugal. Why? Because Brazil did not sign one of these treaties with the United States, and Portugal, from what I understand, has signed the treaty, but they have not put that treaty into effect yet. So they're not giving those visas in that category. So that type of person, I would prefer to do it as Italian. I believe that sometimes you'll see this with you could see this with people that have maybe you may see this with people that have maybe 2 or 3 different nationalities, and maybe I will decide to choose the one that's either cheaper, because let's say it's a family of 6 and they're charging $200 if you're from Argentina, but they don't charge you if you're from Mexico. Then I'll choose the one from Mexico because I'm going to save that client $1,200.
Got it.
Right?
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And it also depends on some of these countries have very limited visas. Some of them, I believe that the visa is granted for less time to certain countries than others. So we have to do that analysis and figure out which one makes the most sense in that scenario.
Sure. Yeah. In terms of the alternatives, so it's like we've identified the E2s. We have dealt with E2s before, but in terms of the alternatives for visa, what other visas out there are suitable for foreign investors that are looking for the change of legal status based on their investments in the U.S. economy?
You know what? That's going to depend. Everybody's different. There are visas that are business visas. Some of them are more difficult than others. A few of them could be where a person has a business. Let's say that they purchase 3 franchises in the United States, and they put them all within the same parent company, and then they also have a business back home. Let's say it's Serbia, Croatia, Greece, and they want to go ahead and do a international transfer. We could do that if we can prove that they were an executive back home and they're going to be an executive here. The only problem with that is we have to see how many employees are you going to have, how big is the operation going to be, because that classification of international transfers, they tend to require quite a few employees to be able to justify the position as executive in the United States, because they consider that the executive duties need to be at least 50% of the time spent by the person. So if it's a smaller company, they will start to attribute to you functions that are non-executive because of the small nature of the company.
Sure. What about, what's interesting segment that I get asked a lot about from the clients, the liabilities and securities. So if they were to make an investment, right, they purchase a business that's a registered franchise, the businesses, just like anything else, they have their success rates and they have their failure rates, and nothing is guaranteed. Business is business itself. In the event that the business that they invested in does not succeed and fails within, let's say, 1 year or 2 years of the business, as we know, in hospitality is very difficult, right? In hospitality, we have a rule in which we say that 90% of the restaurants in hospitality fail within the first 18 to 24 months. If they're any operational open after that, it's just a bunch of signs of struggle. But if that does happen, what happens to their visa? If that business does fail and close its operations, what happens to their visa? So let's say they get a visa approved for 5 years or 2 years, and within that period, the business is no longer operational due to their losses. What's their status at that point?
Okay, so that's why it's important to set up the companies in a certain way so that if the client from the beginning is not sure of how this business is going to go, it's probably good to set it up in such a way that maybe the visa is being requested by the parent company, and that company then, if it holds the visa and the parent company opens another business, maybe in a similar thing, or maybe it's still food, maybe it's still restaurants, that you wouldn't lose the visa. So that is something to be looked at when you're planning these visas out.
Understood.
In terms of, and you had asked me, by the way, and I wanted to touch on it. You had asked me about consulates and differences in consulates, and you are absolutely right. Different consulates can make a big difference in cases. We tend to like some of the smaller consulates tend to be better. Some of the larger ones tend to be the ones where you hear a lot of horror stories, like Paris tends to be difficult. London tends to be difficult. If I had to choose, I would always go with the smaller ones. They tend to be nicer. They tend to be quicker. A lot depends on the country and the country conditions of the country. Some countries have a lot going on. Some countries, for example, Colombia still has not opened to visa processing since the beginning of the pandemic. So it's 3 years later, and Bogota still is not processing E2 and E1 visas.
Wow.
So in that sense, if it's a Colombian that's a dual national, then you could send them, let's say they have a Spanish passport, you can send them to Spain. If they have a Mexican passport, you can send them to Mexico. But if they don't have one of those passports and they don't live in one of those countries, then that person's probably in a pickle. There are, just kind of talking about specifically about Colombians, but the Colombians, most of them, what they're doing is they might have a business going on here, and there is an option. They can change status here. The only problem is that they'll have to stay in the States until that consulate opens for them to be able to come back, because to come back, they need to stamp the visa.
In sense of people that are inquiring for this, right? And in communication with your office, could you give them some sort of a timelines and costs where they're deciding to move their families to the United States to obtain the change of legal status for themselves and their spouse and the children under the age of 21. What is the process that would go in terms of the timeline and the costs by hiring your office?
Okay, so timeline depends. I tell all my clients that do investor visas this exact thing, that the timeline depends a lot on you. We are prepared to work with the client. If it's 9 months, it's 9 months. If it's a year, it's a year. If it's 6 months, it's 6 months. I tell my clients that I'm not charging you more for the amount of time. I always tell them I would prefer to be involved early. So that means before investment monies have been transferred to the United States, before a company has been opened, before an LLC opened, before they sign a franchise agreement. Why? Because there's little things that we can notice from the beginning that will save us a lot of time later.
Sure.
In terms of time, we really tend to work at the same time as the person is setting up their company. So if we were involved and we reviewed articles of incorporation, or the articles to form the LLC, and we reviewed that, and we were along with the client, we were next to the client, helping them with that piece, and then we helped them maybe to open up their to get their EIN number with the federal government. Then they went to open up their bank account, and I want to be involved when they're bringing the money, because I want to make sure that money comes to the United States clean, and that we can prove where the money came from, and that the money, that piece was done as clean as possible, so that we don't have to come back and explain to immigration or to a consular officer something that's too complicated. The more complicated you make it for the officer, the more complicated they're going to make it for you. They don't have much time, so they have maybe 20 minutes to review your file, and you want to make it as simple as possible. And some of these consulates, actually, they limit how many pages you can send them. Sometimes they're well, we'll only accept 50 pages. And if they only accept 50 pages and at least half of it is going to be your business plan, then the rest of the documents better be pretty simple.
Yeah.
Like I tell my clients, the more complicated you make things for the officer, the more complicated they're going to make it for you. So just try to keep it simple, and that goes a long way. In terms of time, as I said, we work with the client at the same time that they're setting things up. I need to set something up where I can show that the investment was made, that the investment was a good investment, that it came from clean funds, that it was sent to the United States, that it's personal money, that it's not money from a company. If it was a company back home, let's say it's a family in I don't know, France, or any of the, let's say it's in France, and the money comes from France. I want to make sure that that money came from their personal funds. If it's going to come from a company, great. It can come from the company, but you need to pay it to yourself as a distribution, and then we use that money for this purpose.
I think that the biggest, that's a very good explanation. I think it's explanation that a lot of people want to hear, that definition of clean money. We're not necessarily thinking of the money that could come from criminal activities of the person that they're trying to make an investment.
That too. I mean, let's say that, yes, and let's just assume for a second that we're looking only at the source of the funds. The government's going to look at the source of the funds too. So if you want it to be as clean as possible, all right, you sold a property. The property netted you $300,000. Well, right there, that's your clean source of funds.
Understood.
If you have a company,
as long as the funding, so it's very important that the funding that they're transferring into the United States comes from their personal account, and the distribution of those funds comes also from an evidence source.
Yes. So the monies that you're going to use, not only does it have to be from your personal funds, because it has to be a personal investment, but it also needs to be, we need to prove where that money came from. So for example, let's say that it's a father giving money to his son to do the investment. Then we're going to need to prove that there was a gift, which is not hard. But
Hmm.
we're also going to have to show, well, where did the money come from? If it was $200,000, then we're going to want to show that the $200,000 came from the father's business, and the father wrote himself a check for the $200,000 as a distribution from his company. We might want to show that it's a viable company that actually has that type of money in their accounts, and with that, we should be okay. We should be okay.
To
But we do
retain,
have to do a little bit of we do have to do a little bit of an excavation here, just to make sure that when they go to that interview, that that piece is covered. Especially when you're dealing with certain consulates.
mhm.
Italy, I could think of. I could think that Serbia might be. They might want to look at that a little bit. Definitely
Sure.
Colombia, the day that they reopen, that they look at that stuff. Latin America in general, they do look at that a little closely.
In terms of the fees and costs that they would inquire through your office, what are some of the fees that they would look into in terms of expensing by obtaining your services throughout the process?
Okay, so the way that this works is we charge our attorney's fees, and then separately from the attorney's fees, there are fees that are called basically costs. They're costs that are incurred as we're going through a case. So costs such as those would be a business plan for an E2. It's essential. Business plans with some of the accountants that we work with, they're charging about $2,000. I would clarify for the viewers that we're attorneys, and so we don't really work. We're not accountants. The accounting work that has to be done to get into to be put into a business plan, it's very important. Sometimes the business plan is what will cover you for several of the elements necessary to get this approved. And so what we do is we use accountants that are versed in immigration. They're accountants that know what the officers back in Belgrade or Athens, um, you know, what they're looking for, okay, or in Bratislava. Uh,
Hmm.
so these accountants handle this, but it's not handled in my office, but we do work very closely with them. So when they're finished with one of these business plans, they'll send it to us. We review them, and we make sure that it has everything that we need, and that it makes sense, and that there aren't any mistakes. And then we pass them on to the consulate when we file. So that's one type of expense. Other expenses that are extra costs end up being Department of State fees. Department of State is always going to charge the normal fee that they charge everyone, which is basically, I believe the last time I looked, it was $165. Um, that amount, and it may be 170. I know that they just raised it, but the basic fee, which you pay for to get, for example, a tourist visa, that is what they charge for this. Plus, they also charge reciprocity fees, which depend on the country. Some countries it's zero. Some other countries, it can be $200. It could be $250. It depends, and that's per person applying.
Yeah,
In terms of our expenses and our attorney's fees, that really depends on what we're looking at. We have we have some fees that we quote that generally tend to be about the same for all of these. It is less than 10,000, but there is a range. So
sure.
it's an amount that we charge for these cases. Some cases may be more complicated than others, and they may be charged at a higher rate, but generally, we've been sticking to our same attorney's fees for a little while. Um, Anybody that needs a consult, absolutely, that's something that we discuss in our consult, and we would figure out with the client at that
Yeah.
point.
But
Other expenses, maybe translations, because when you have
mhm,
a case like maybe
yeah,
a
the
property was
documents.
sold and
Sure.
it's in another language that's not English, then we would have to translate.
In terms of like for to review your office, you guys have, from the simplicities to extremities in terms of the cases that you're dealing with. Aside from helping people, foreigners, obtain their legal change of status through investments and franchise purchases or business purchases, what are some of the other things that you do in your office? Because I know you guys cover a variety of things under the immigration umbrella. Could you go through them in key points so people are aware that that spectrum that you have in your arsenal?
Sure, Milos. We are full service. So that basically means that we can handle anything within the immigration umbrella. There's immigration covers a lot of different things. So
Sure.
we could start off with maybe we have a department that handles asylum claims. So there are quite a few people that have come to the United States for either because they were persecuted or because they were having trouble back home. Obviously, we're seeing some of this from Eastern Europe with Ukraine and Russian cases, Ukrainian cases. We have a few Serbian cases, and it could be for It could be for political reasons. It could be because they're being persecuted for who they are, maybe their sexuality. It could be a number of different things that come
Sure.
under that. We handle quite a few family type of residency cases. Family cases could be it could be a case based on marriage. It could be a case based on parents that are United States citizens, children, all types of cases on that side. We handle citizenship. We handle a lot of citizenship for people that want this type of service, which is basically a take you by the hand and guide you through type of service. We have a very robust staff that we spend a lot of time training and helping to give that type of service, the type of service that I want given to my client.
Sure.
So we do spend a lot of time with our people on that. What other type of cases? We handle a lot of business cases that aren't necessarily on the investment side, but for example, we handle a lot of extraordinary ability residencies and visas. So people that maybe are the best at what they do back home.
Very important.
That
Yeah.
could be it could be business, it could be art, it could be an actor, it could be a director, it could be a photographer, it could be a makeup artist. As long as you're the best at what you do, I think the only area that doesn't get covered in that would be lawyers, unfortunately.
Which is
for whatever reason we're discriminated against by the law. But other than lawyers, I think that we could cover almost anything, whether it's business, sports. Sports
Sure.
is a very good one.
In terms of, you know what, I wanted to leave this question for last because I think it's very interesting. And when I tell people about it, when I tell clients about it, they get quite shocked that does play an effect. In my opinion, it does play an effect. Throughout the years, we've seen different political parties take control over the country. And, especially, when we would go through a shift from Democratic to Republicans or Republicans to Democrats, at least through national media, we see a tremendous shift in immigration system. How much does that? How big of a role does that play? Currently we're in the Democratic Party. If the parties are to shift in the end of 2024, how much of a foreseeable trouble or ease would that present to the foreigners?
To be honest, it depends on what you're looking for. But generally speaking, people that are coming to the United States and purchasing franchises and wanting maybe an e-visa, or maybe they're looking down the road at a residency, that type of client generally is not affected by a change in administration.
Got it.
I like to explain a little bit to people about our political system. Our political system really at this moment is not as divided as it sounds. When you compare where Democrats are and where Republicans are, at least the Democrats, for example, like Biden, who's a very centrist type of guy. If you looked at where he is compared to where the Republicans are, the space or the distance is not nearly as great as what you would see in the elections that just happened in Spain. In Spain, you have several very far left parties. Then you have the Socialist Party, which is further to the right than those leftist parties, and then you have in the middle somewhere you have maybe the PP, and then to the right of them you have Vox. So you have a huge spectrum of difference. In the United States, the Democratic Party really, they constantly say that they believe in the free market. Our economy probably has never been better. So really, I don't think that anyone that comes to the United States now would say that we're under a socialist government, because it's not. It's so the difference in our parties is not big enough for someone to really worry too much. And even when we had a very sharp shift between Obama and Trump, what we saw was more along the lines of difficulty with people that were in cases such as an asylum case, maybe someone that was illegal in the country. Yes, there were some countries that had difficulties. For example, people that were from Middle Eastern countries did have some more difficulties. But generally speaking, people from Europe, South America, that had visas that were coming here just to invest are not really affected by that type of change. I don't have a crystal ball to say what would happen, but I doubt, based on all the years that I've been doing this, that they would feel any difference.
Sure. Well, that's a lot of things we've covered here. I think these are the most points and information that people really wanted to see. Now, obviously, there's more details that they would have all preference based on their individual cases, the country that they're coming from. Treaty point was really important. That was really good that you brought it up. The source of money and tracking that source of money, where the immigration officers wouldn't find it as suspicious, was a great point.
Milos, I just thought of something also that maybe that would help them, is to understand that it's not only about bringing the money to the States. So let's say they bring the money to the States and they put $150,000 in their bank account. They need to spend it, because immigration does not consider the investment made until the monies are spent. So the whole money doesn't have to be spent, but a good part does. So if we're talking about franchises, and each franchise is worth $50,000, and they buy 3, then I'm going to want to show that at least 2 were purchased, and that out of those 2, at least one of them is already running.
Understood. Okay. That's another great point in terms of the investment. These are some of the questions that I would want clients to ask you once they retain you, obviously, because those are the details that they're time consuming, and they all vary, obviously, from case to case basis. But the expense reports provided from the expenses claimed are something very important. I've seen it on the cases that I've worked with you in the past, in which immigration officers were very particular, in a sense. If the business was purchased in lump sum, they would want independent documentation showing how much has it gone towards the equipment, how much has gone towards the business evaluation itself. Is there anything proprietary in the business? And if so, to be clearly identified. That was something that was very intriguing to me and interesting, that the immigration office definitely paid attention to that, where your investment and transfer of funds from a foreign country into the United States means absolutely nothing until you show the distribution of those funds.
Correct. And we want to be able to show them that, even though, see, they're not looking at the money getting to the States, but they want to see how it's spent. So they want to see that you're claiming that you're investing $200,000. Okay. They want to see at least 100 of it, or 150 spent, because once it's spent, it's going to move out into the economy. And then that's when it really isn't. It's really not only is it, and it's not necessarily an investment in a franchise. It's an investment in our economy, in our national interest.
Sure. I guess this is a follow-up question of what you just mentioned. In terms of for the immigration purposes, when they're evaluating a business, how much does its profit loss matter when it comes down to the approval rates? For example, just to clarify from the franchise perspective, some franchises in different market categories, some markets have higher profit margins. Some markets have, very low profit margins, because they're basing their business model on quantities rather than individual businesses that are looking for high capital gain. How much does that P&L percentage and those margins matter to immigration office?
I have never read anything that it made much of a difference. I think that what they're really looking at is, was the investment made? Is the investment substantial?
Mm-hmm.
And is this a marginal business?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big difference between profitability and marginality. So
Mm-hmm.
if you could have a large profit, but all that profit could be basically just going to you, and you're not investing in the economy, you're not employing anybody. But if you
Mm-hmm.
have employees and you have a low investment, then you can prove that it's not marginal. And you could also have a high profit, have employees, and also show marginality, and have,
Mm-hmm.
so it's a matter, to me, it's a matter of worrying about the concepts that immigration's worrying about, because the profitability, especially of a new business, if you're talking about getting a visa based on a business that you just opened maybe within the last year, I think that they expect that the business isn't going to have profitability at that point.
Sure. What about the range? Like in terms of range of your practice, are they, for the clients that would want to retain your services, do they have to strictly operate in a state of Florida, or is this something where they can retain you for intention to purchase a franchise in another state in the city and operate it from there?
Yeah, we basically are barred to, as attorneys that are barred. Actually, we have an attorney here that's barred in a few states, but
Mm-hmm.
we are barred in Florida. But that does not mean that we can't do work in other states. In fact, we work in other states all the time, because immigration is an issue it's a federal issue. And because it's federal, we can, I work with cases all over the country. I've been to at least, I think it's 25 different immigration offices all over the country, from California to New York, all the way down to all the offices in Florida I've been to.
Mm-hmm.
So we have worked with cases all over the country, and we're very proud of that. That we have cases all over the place at all moments. And in the specific field of franchises and E2s, we have cases all over the place as well. We've got cases right now in Texas. I believe we have one in Colorado, North Carolina, obviously in Florida, but we've got a case in New York right now as well. So we've got cases all over the place. And the great thing with us is that we're not just fixated on Florida. We are very well prepared for cases all over the place. When it comes to maybe some commercial issues, we may have to get ourselves somebody in that state to help us maybe with some contracts and things like that. But we're also very good with that. We have a great network from which to call upon, and so we can always help with those issues as well.
Cool. Well, look, I'll give you a genuine statement of mine. I've had, I'm a rookie in the franchise brokerage. Clearly, I have. This is something that I've started recently, and I don't even want to rank the level of success that I'm having so far. But I'm very happy for the amount of information and the knowledge that I obtained. It's that much easier working in franchise brokerage business, knowing that I have you and your team on my side in terms of the comfort and a genuine knowledge of information, where I have such a high level of confidence for the clients that are seeking to obtain their visas for the first time, or they're looking for their change of status in the United States, where I know that as far as the facts and the material on the franchise that they want to purchase, I have that all covered. But when it comes down to their question about potentially obtaining their status in the United States or change of current status to something else, it's a great pleasure and honor to work with you. You have such an easygoing nature in terms of work. You're very patient. I have never sensed any stress come from your guys' office, although I know that you're dealing with a bunch of stuff all the time. So I'm very happy for you. That's my genuine statement. And I speak on behalf of my entire office when I say that. So I do want to thank you for your time. I'll give you a closing statement. I'll give you a closing statement at your wish.
Thank you. The only thing I can follow up on that is that we really try hard here, and we take it very personal. Our cases, we really take it very personal, and we have a very family. We've gotten bigger, but we still have, and we've been able to hold on to this family sense of working with things. Most everyone here with us has been with us for a while. We build around knowledge as well, so everyone here is very well prepared. We care, and I think that
Yeah.
comes through in everything that we do. We go the extra mile for our clients in everything that we possibly can. And we just work hard. We work hard, and we try hard, and we care about what we do, and that's the way we see it. And we also like to be straight up and honest and ethical. And we tell our clients straight up if we see that there's an issue with something. We tell them. If we see that we can't take a case because of whatever reason, we tell them too. I'd rather tell people and be straightforward from the beginning than to have problems with someone later, or maybe someone loses a case. We are very upfront. So very upfront, very direct, but at the same time we care. Once you're our client, we will do what we have to do to make sure that your case is going to go through within reason and within ethical boundaries.
Cool. Well, look, David, thank you for your time. This is a great amount of information, great amount of knowledge. People will really enjoy it. I've enjoyed it. Although I heard this conversation, I heard this information many times before. There's always a piece of information you add to it that I have not heard before, and it ticks me off. But I really thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll talk
Absolutely.
soon.
Well, thank you, Milos. It's a topic that I could talk about all day because to me it's fascinating, and I love what I do.
Cool. Have a good day, David. Thank you.
Awesome. You too. Take care. Bye.